Hello everyone, and welcome to the channel. Before we dive into today's story, we just wanted to take a quick second to say thank you all for watching. We truly appreciate your support. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It's totally free, and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our latest stories. Now, with all that said, let's jump straight into the story.
I never thought I'd be the one to unravel the mystery that haunted our small town. My name is Lily, and I'm the kind of person who doesn't back down from a challenge. When I was younger, I used to think that fear was just a state of mind, something you could push past with enough willpower. But there are some things that even the bravest among us can't ignore, and Barry was one of them. Barry was the kind of man who made the hair on the back of your neck stand up. He lived on the outskirts of town, in a dilapidated house that seemed to have been abandoned for decades. The locals whispered about him, but no one ever dared to confront him. They said he had a dark and twisted ability that could change the way people thought. I didn't believe it at first, but as the years went by, the rumors only grew. It started with the disappearances. At first, it was just one or two women, but then it became a pattern. Young, beautiful women, all gone without a trace. The police were stumped and the town was on edge. People began to avoid certain areas, especially the road that led to Barry's house. I, on the other hand, was intrigued. I had always been a bit of a detective at heart, and the more I heard, the more I wanted to find out the truth. One night, I decided to take a walk down that road. The moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. As I approached Barry's house, I could feel a chill in the air. The house itself was a monstrosity, with its crooked windows and peeling paint. But what really caught my attention was the silence. It was as if the very air around the house was holding its breath. I crept closer, my heart pounding in my chest. The front door was slightly ajar, and I could hear faint whispers coming from inside. I pushed the door open and stepped into the darkness. The inside of the house was just as eerie as the outside, with cobwebs hanging from the ceiling and a musty smell that made my nose wrinkle. As I moved through the house, I noticed that the walls were lined with old photographs. They were all of women, each one younger and more beautiful than the last. My stomach churned as I realized what I was looking at. These were the women who had disappeared. I knew I had to find out more, but I also knew I had to be careful. Barry was dangerous, and I didn't want to become another one of his victims. I continued to explore, my senses on high alert. I found a hidden door in the kitchen, and it led to a set of stairs that descended into the basement. The air grew colder as I made my way down, and the whispers grew louder. When I reached the bottom, I was greeted by a sight that would haunt me for the rest of my life. The basement was a torture chamber. There were chains on the walls, and the floor was stained with what I could only assume was blood. In the center of the room was a large table, and on it lay a woman, unconscious and bound. I knew I had to act fast. I grabbed a nearby crowbar and started to break the chains that held her down. As I worked, I could hear footsteps coming from above. Barry was coming, and I had to get out of there. Just as I freed the woman, Barry appeared at the top of the stairs. He was a tall, imposing figure, with a face that seemed to be carved from stone. His eyes were cold and calculating, and I could see the power he held in them. But I wasn't afraid. I had come too far to back down now. "Who are you?" he growled, his voice low and menacing. "I'm the one who's going to stop you," I replied, my voice steady. He laughed, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You think you can stop me? No one has ever been able to do that." But I didn't back down. I had the woman on her feet, and we started to make our way up the stairs. Barry moved to block our path, but I was quicker. I swung the crowbar at him, and he stumbled back. We managed to get past him and out of the house, but I knew he wouldn't give up that easily. We ran as fast as we could, the woman still dazed and disoriented. I called the police as we ran, and they arrived just as Barry was coming out of the house. He tried to use his power on them, but they were too many, and he was too weak from the fight with me. They arrested him on the spot, and he was sent to prison. The woman, whose name was Sarah, was the only one to ever escape Barry's clutches. She had been brave, and she had helped me bring him to justice. We both knew that the town would never be the same, but at least we had stopped a monster. In the days that followed, the town began to heal. The police uncovered more evidence, and Barry was charged with multiple counts of kidnapping, torture, and murder. He was sentenced to life in prison, and the town finally had a sense of closure. But the memory of that night stayed with me. I had faced my fears and come out the other side, but I knew that there were still dark corners in the world that needed to be explored. I continued to investigate, always on the lookout for the next mystery to solve. And every time I looked into the eyes of a suspect, I remembered the power of fear and the strength it takes to overcome it. In the end, it wasn't just about stopping a monster. It was about proving that even in the darkest of times, there is always a glimmer of hope. And sometimes, that glimmer comes from the most unexpected places. The town celebrated Barry's capture as a victory against the darkness that had plagued them for years. But deep inside, I knew it wasn't over. Something about the way Barry had laughed that night haunted me. It was as if he knew something I didn't. And soon I was about to find out what that was. It started with the nightmares. At first, they were just flashes, glimpses of Jane's terrified face, the blood-stained floor of the basement, and Barry's cold, dead stare. But then they became more vivid. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, the sound of whispers still ringing in my ears. Then the voices started when I was awake. At first, I thought it was paranoia, an aftereffect of my encounter with Barry. But then Jane called me one night, her voice trembling. "Lily, something's wrong," she whispered. "You remember telling me that you hear whispers at night?" "I hear them too. The same ones I had heard in Barry's house." It was then that I knew I had to go back. Not because I wanted to, but because something was unfinished. Something in that house still breathed in the darkness. I arrived at Barry's house just past midnight. It stood exactly as I had left it, decrepit, lifeless, but not empty. The moment I stepped onto the porch, the air around me thickened, pressing against my skin like invisible hands. The door, still ajar from the night of our escape, let out a prolonged creak as I stepped inside. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It was worse this time, pungent and rotting. My stomach twisted, but I pressed forward. The house was eerily quiet, save for the faint hum of whispers emanating from below. I took slow, deliberate steps down the basement stairs, my flashlight flickering. The chains were still there, hanging limply from the walls. The table where Jane had been restrained was now covered in deep claw-like scratches. But something was different. The floor, it was shifting. I knelt, brushing my hand against the blood-stained cement, only to realize it wasn't cement at all. It was wood. Old, brittle, and covering something beneath it. I found a rusted crowbar nearby and pried at the floorboards. The whispers grew louder, frenzied, as though something was fighting to be heard. The boards gave way, revealing a hidden hatch. I hesitated for only a second before lifting it open. Below was a staircase, spiraling downward into darkness. As I descended, the air grew colder, heavy with the scent of decay. My flashlight flickered wildly, struggling against the suffocating blackness. And then I saw them, rows of cages lining the walls, each one filled with something. Some were empty, their metal bars bent outward as if something had clawed its way free. Others held remnants of the past, bones, torn clothing, personal belongings covered in dust. But one cage was still occupied. A woman. Her eyes, hollow and sunken, met mine. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stared. A chill ran down my spine as I stepped closer. That's when I noticed something. Her lips. They were moving, but no sound came out. And then, in a voice that was not her own, she whispered, "He's not gone." I turned, every nerve in my body screaming at me to run. But I was too late. The door at the top of the stairs slammed shut. The temperature dropped sharply, my breath forming invisible puffs. The shadows shifted around me, crawling up the walls. And then I heard it, laughter. Low, guttural, and unmistakable. Barry. But that was impossible. He was in prison. I saw him taken away. I saw him restrained. And yet, his voice filled the chamber. "You thought you could stop me?" The voice sneered, reverberating off the walls. "You only scratched the surface." The whispers crescendoed into a deafening roar, and the woman in the cage began convulsing, her body contorting unnaturally. Her fingers bent at odd angles, her spine arching back. And then she turned to face me, her eyes no longer hollow but filled with something else, something ancient and hungry. I ran. Scrambling up the stairs, my hands fumbling for the door. It wouldn't budge. Something was holding it down. I slammed against it, panic rising in my throat. With a final, desperate push, the door burst open and I scrambled through, slamming it shut behind me. The whispers turned to screams, the house shaking as if it were alive. I didn't stop running. Not until I was outside, gasping for breath under the night sky. I called the police. Again. But this time they didn't find anything. No hidden chamber. No cages. No woman. Just an empty house filled with echoes. Barry was still in prison. But something told me he had never truly been the monster in that house. And whatever it was still waiting. Then silence. I turned back toward the room, my flashlight catching movement in the farthest corner. The woman was gone. The cages were empty. And yet I wasn't alone. A figure emerged from the darkness, slow and deliberate. It wasn't Barry. But it wore his face. The nightmares didn't stop. Neither did the whispers. Jane disappeared 3 days later, her apartment left untouched except for one thing: a photograph placed neatly on her pillow. The photo was of me. And behind me, in the reflection of a mirror, stood Barry, or what was left of him. I left town the next day. But I know deep down, it's not over. It will never be over.
Ready for spine-chilling tales that will haunt your thoughts? Subscribe to Forgotten Storyteller for eerie narrations, unsettling mysteries, and haunting stories you won't forget. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a story, because some stories refuse to stay buried. Join us, if you dare,